Yeah, it depends on what you do, but in a way, it's true that let's say in the first example of make a soup. So in my scene 1, where I have all these duplicates of another composition, I can also say, well, these are all going to be 3D layers. And in these 3D layers, I'm going now to add a new camera. This is how the camera just looks. It's just flat. So, if I would, let's say, open all my layers up and look at top view, you see that they are actually lined up. Of course, they're really thin. So we're just looking at them from the middle, being stacked on top of each other in one and the same position. So if I start by, let's say, this one, and I'm going to just drag it back, and one goes more to the front. So I kind of starting to kind of create a certain depth. Then if I go back to my active camera view, you already see some variations because of the perspective, that the ones that are at the back are smaller and the ones that are in the front are bigger. But still, I don't know if that would make it very kind of 3D-ish. What we could also do is in my camera settings, I can say the depth of field is already on. I can try to put the aperture up and the blur level to kind of create and see where the focus distance is. So here you start noticing that the things that are more to the front, they are also getting out of focus. So you can create and play with this depth of field. Where is my camera and where is my lens kind of focusing on which area of this depth? But it would, of course, would make more sense, or it becomes more dramatic if I start to reposition my camera, not on a frontal axis. I can either change the settings of how I rotate or how I position all my little clips of make, but I can also just start tweaking, let's say, the position of the camera. So that they kind of like are already looking at this under a kind of a certain angle. Then all of a sudden it makes more sense that you feel that there is, let's say, more of a depth. Combine that, then you get, and this is even not, this is not very labor intense even for your computer when you're working with type. And vice versa. Yeah, there's a real power in there where you can also wrap it around objects.
Well, I also, if you're like gonna animate with like drawings, would you like to use After Effects or to import it?
Drawings?
Yeah, like animation. For like, if I would have the end wording that's called typography, and I would like all my scribbles, would I do it in After Effects or is there?
That probably depends a bit on what you're aiming at, in the sense of like, do you want to have it almost like scribbled, filled as a texture, or then you could draw a path in Illustrator, and if you copy paste the path directly from Illustrator on a solid or on a comp, then it will recognize it as a mask. So if you then put this render stroke on top of it, it will just like draw this kind of scribble in there. So now I just tweaked and made that layer. I'm gonna turn this off and put it back in. So you still see that what I did is that now it is the, let's say, the 3D version in here that turns into that one. So even if you have a 3D layer or a 3D composition and you put that back into a 2D composition, doesn't matter. It will just see it as a 3D kind of like flat video clip embedded into a new composition. Yeah? And yeah, the sky's the limit in terms of if you want lightning effects and shades, and of course then the calculation becomes maybe a bit more severe, but in general this is actually still super fine to do. Yeah. Okay, so what I want to do is there like, yeah, this could be an example, a typhoon, but it kind of taps already into what we discussed for making a stroke being kind of animated to let it presume that you're drawing something. Anyone has a particular simple kind of example of a start and an end with the problem of how to get between the two of them? Yes. Okay. So you have, let's say, the problem is that we need to have a letter shape that is, let's say, invisible, and you want to either fill the letter in a kind of animation that it kind of gives it a color, but animates the color in, so to speak. Okay. Yeah, so that in this case, what we could do is that I'm going back to my DRK. I'm going to duplicate this for a second and take care of this. So we have a letter, and let's go for something else. Did you have a letter in mind? I don't know. Okay. Let's say we have a Q. And let's beef our Q a bit. Comme ça. So basically what you want is that you would like to have some kind of animation process that would change the appearance inside the shape of the letter form. So in this case also what we could do is to create a shape So now it's an outlined version of this. Automatically it kind of makes a kind of a stroke and a fill. So the stroke in this case I don't need. And in this fill it has, let's say, a color which is black. So I'm thinking there's different ways of tackling this. Would you because one thing is to, you could of course, very simple, change the color. So if I put the timer here and I put the timer here and I'm going to say it's going to turn red, it will just make this red. If I go from white to a color, it's fine, but it's actually the same as making a fade. So that's actually pretty boring. That's not maybe so specifically what we would like. What would be maybe more interesting is that maybe we should kind of tackle it from a different idea. Is if I would already say I'm going to create a new solid, and I'm going to give this a color. So I'm going to put this at the bottom. And so I have this cue. What I could do is that basically, if I turn this one off and go back to my original cue, I can also say, well, I'm going to create a mask from this one. So in this case, I could say that the cue is now actually a mask kind of looking towards a color background. I can also put an image there just to give it that. And in this case, what I could do is that I can also then apply, let's say if I go to the animation presets and look for transitions, doesn't actually matter what. Wait, this one off. So I could kind of make a kind. Doesn't matter actually what the expression is. I can also say that that it kind of like wipes in. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, but it's more, that's more about like how to tweak that, because you can also say the wipe center is where is the center? Right. I used this before. Why is not? This is the top. Video live. This is from the bottom. Because they're, I'm not sure why, but there's also this thing where you can of course, could also be. Sometimes just finding the right one. So if I would make a, you could also say that it does this. Very a clock wipe. So that if you would kind of make this transition, that it kind of seems as though it's kind of like drawing itself in. Huh? So it's this kind of shapes and finding actually sometimes where these prefab expressions can already come very close, and then of course you can tweak in the sense of the angle, which is the center, if it's how it kind of like, I think that you can, the start and end angle, so you can even create some kind of dynamic that is not this very kind of rigid clock form, but especially since our shape is quite round, it already kind of does the trick depending on where you want it to start, more or less.
So one is Jackson, it's called white to center, white into center. So maybe you can also go first that one, reflex, and then animate it. And then down, white into center.
Yeah, I use it often on. It could even be that probably. Yeah, you see it because it's a text. Yeah, it works on text layers. So it could also be that it already automatically kind of does this. Hey. I think since it's only one letter, it doesn't even perform the animation. It just says goes on and off. So in this case, but to have a bit more control over the shape, then you're probably better off trying to kind of use, let's say, some kind of wipe to do this. Yeah? So this is just showing an object. Again, since the background is actually transparent, it might look white here, but that's the composition setting. It doesn't mean that it is really white. It means that in my merge, so I already made this kind of crazy mashup here of things that are kind of going on here with this shit. that if I put this one in there, it still seems to be transparent. So you get and still you are able to wait, that's funny. Because of course it's still a mask, so first it looks through and then the text is actually set to a background because of the solid. There's another way to do this, but yeah, of course if I take this mask and apply them directly on the solid, and then probably, yeah, it's still on top of it, but it's almost like a transparent, its own unique shape. So even if you have like these shadings and fades, they still kind of move nicely on top of each other. Okay. Anyone else with a good problem?
I can't seem to export one composition into.
Well, that exporting is not an issue right
No,
now.
I mean duplicated into, like, I have one word that I edited in the meantime, and I already put it in the other composition, so I see, put it together. I edited it, I go back to my scene, but nothing was changed.
You just drag the previous composition in a new composition. If you go back and forth, so everything I change here, if I would here change this composition or the layer settings, and instead of saying it's blue, I'm going to turn it into pink. If I go back to here, it's blue, it's pink. So they need to be connected somehow, then something else probably goes wrong. But come on guys, who has kind of an opening or an idea or a doodle of something they might want to do, and an end, and how? Don't be shy, there's no stupid questions here, because every little thing that needs to change brings problems to the table.
So can I say one or somebody else?
For example, my first story was about the empty vessel, and then I was thinking like maybe with some opening scene, we can have like the outline of each letter, just going from like space, but then slowly putting together, forming kind of the word or something, which is supposed to be, and then putting the main part to be either going back to the same shape,
Yeah, so having multiple objects go into configuration, going back. Yeah, okay. So I think that if we take, let's say I'm gonna again make a new composition, and I'm going to insert my famous Q. I'm actually going to adjust this settings just a bit. So we have okay, and I'm gonna make this pretty short. And now okay, so I have an object, and it could be multiple objects. And what we want to do is that, let's say, in the case that these would be either letters or other words, I'm going to kind of configure these. So one thing is that if I scale these down, and I'm going to, let's say, first think of a final setup that I think that would be kind of helpful. So if I start to kind of duplicate these, I can say, okay, I'm gonna put them kind of apart. This could, of course, be all kinds of different words, different compositions, different items. Maybe I'm gonna create a couple of more. Okay. So they all kind of follow the same path. So the thing is that, of course, you could say, in this case, I'm going to first make a kind of a composition how the words or my constellation kind of will kind of work out in this stage where they will appear. So we have all these little QQBs, and voila. So that is one thing. And one of the simplest thing would be is to say, okay, let's pick a marker here where I'm gonna open them all, select them all, I'm gonna open again, and I'm gonna give them all the same position. So probably now with all of them, they have the same momentum in time on their position where they are. So basically what I could do is then, if I go to this beginning point, I could say I'm gonna draw them all out. Right? And the same here, if I go to this point, I could say more or less. So in 3 stages they go in and they move out. Yeah? So usefully, it's quite often useful to just think of the construct of determining your final layout and start there, putting the markers and putting the keyframes on, and then moving either ways. Yeah? And so in this case, even to complicate things further, but to kind of understand the logic again, also in the power of chaining up things, and is that if I would now, let's say, have all these keyframes here, I'm back. So, and they're all connected to this. If I would say that I'm going to change this and then select this K and drag that on top. So you can even like make all kinds of small little clips with potential interesting things to kind of also see, because later on then you can quite easily, since it takes the length of this, you can just say, okay, then I'm curious what happens, because the animation still applies. It takes the same things of the positions of whatever you already appointed to those layers. It just changes the link to which clips you're referring to, which is actually very handy also when you, let's say, make, in my case sometimes I need to make, let's say, something for an event, but there's going to be 6 events. So the work that I do once, I just make the other ones and I just refresh them with the new date, or with it, and you just need to export them instead of making everything all over again. Right. So you see this big. Right. Come back. Another example. Hit me up.
Yeah, my thing was, you said know the camera. I know you know the camera, but you said it's about movement, so they're like on a street.
Mm-hmm.
The buildings are letters, so you're going from front point of view, like your car passing through them, to the top, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't think it's just, we should place.
Yeah, it's a super nice. Yeah, because let's say we go back to our scene 1, where we started with all the makes in, let's say, in these different 3Ds. So what we could do is that I'm going to just duplicate this scene and start again here, because you could potentially think of it that one way is that in the end we're going to use this format, this portrait kind of poster-like video screen format, but your street probably will need more space than that, or your city or whatever. So I could also, in this case, in my composition settings, I'm gonna put this in here. Street, and instead of making this a normal HD size, I can also say I'm going to make this 3000 by 4000 pixels. So it's a lot bigger, and the only thing is that what happened to Here. Okay, so now I have more space. This is my camera view, but I want to have these words appearing as though they are buildings. So one thing that I could do is, what would be convenient is to make a new solid, to at least give it a ground or a base. So if I go to my camera view, I'm gonna put two views here. So this is the camera that I'm seeing, and this is another view, in this case the top view. So what I want is that this base layer becomes the floor. So in this case, I'm also setting it as a 3D. So actually you already see what's happening is that this solid is in the same perspective as how the camera is looking at the scene. And it doesn't look like it's a floor. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to transform this and give it a, I think, Z rotation. No, then it always mix this up. So I'm going to set this to minus 90. And what I'm also going to do is that in this view, I'm going to bring it down. A bit small. So that it becomes, let's say, the floor of our city. It's also nice. Okay. Can even transform and make this a bit bigger. And say that okay. So now I have my little makeys, and so they are, let's say, the city's building. I can even say that basically what I could do is that in this case I can set the transform and give it a position start, and that it comes up. So it comes out of the street, comes up, right? Then I can also say, well, I would actually love for the rest to follow me on this. So maybe I can open them all up and put this transform on and whip them and say, hey, So they all now have a transformed function, yes. And only this one has it, yeah. You see how quickly you kind of end up having this soup of layers. So if I want to position all of this and then put my marker on this one, it still doesn't go. Yeah. You can just let it follow that one. So let's say that this little cocktail is a movie, and then the last stage of your question could be, is this, let's say, the use of how to navigate the camera. Because of course, one way is to, you can make a whole construction of the buildings, and you could also say that some of these building items are, let's say, can be kind of rotated, that they have a different viewpoint or view angle. So, and then the important part is actually that we have to animate, let's say, the perspective of our camera. So in this case, if we go to the camera settings and the transform, is that you have point of interest, position, orientation, and the same kind of rotational kind of axis. So point of interest, and also these 3 digits, they represent the X, Y, and Z axis. And to be honest, I always mess them up. So I always need to tweak where to kind of see how to work with them. Whether it is kind of like this kind of rotation, or looking more from the top or from the bottom. So let's say we start from a kind of a bird's eye view. Camera options, zoom. And if I go first to, let's say, the top view, zoom out. So my camera is here. I could say, oh, I'm gonna even start here. Take this point of interest. Hey, come here. Left hand. So it is already kind of looking up. But maybe we could say that it even kind of makes this more aggressive. Where's the orbit? maybe I'm gonna just reposition this. So we have this view. And basically, it's the same thing as with everything, is that if I would, let's say, oh, I'm gonna put all these position and the rotation and put them on, and I'm gonna go, let's say, here to a new moment in time, and even just use the orbit tool to say, this is more, let's say, on street level. I didn't check the, let's say, what the focus and the depth of field is, but in this case you would go from having the floor where these street things grow out, and then slowly making the building before it starts to kind of fall apart. Let's see what it does and how, if my computer still likes me. Maybe the blur is a bit much, but just to give an idea of the different positioning and how, let's say, your camera work can be. I think that it also depends on all these kind of focus and distance and all these little tweaks in there that might make this first kind of render choppy, kind of like waiting for every scene to kind of appear properly.
So this would also be very cool in some of the north cameras.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to put north cameras and seeing
Yeah.
and not doing the license. No? So you can make, it's in a way you can make the cameras and then you can put them in those two
Yeah. So
you
you
can
can
blend them.
Yeah. Yeah, that you have these different positions, and then the camera actually goes through all the positions. Yeah. Yeah. And it's here, you can just add multiple cameras.
Yeah.
Go from this view to that view. To
Yeah. But it measures quite quickly. It's not I have a quite technical question. I just did a tryout like this. Is there an easy way to kind of like reverse the motion? So it can go back like this?
Yeah, I think that if you, I think time stretching, if you reverse the time probably stretch.
The bar.
Well, one thing is that if you would make this clip and then put it in a new composition and reverse that composition in timing there and put them back to each other,
Yeah.
You see that's why these questions they often they can have such an easy fix, so to speak. Right? Quite nice. So yeah, that's I think that's the nice part of that by breaking it down, you see how in let's say 30 minutes you can just kind of make a doodle to kind of see, oh, how would I tackle if I have a sentence that says this, or a first part of an instruction of a score that does this. How would I build this sentence up? What is the scene that I'm kind of trying to depict here? Does it need a specific atmosphere, or because basically once I have this, I can make myself very kind of it kind of complicated again. But if I would make another new composition, and I'm gonna just say that I'm gonna just put this 6 seconds in there. So instantly I'm turning this in from a landscape version into or from a portrait version into a landscape version. Because I already made the previous one pretty big. That's why it also took a bit more time to render. But then I even have more control because I can still even scale this one to say which, you see I can even scale it down, let's say to this, and still have this kind of cut out or play around with only that part. But on top of it, I can also do easy tests to kind of just think about very ugly shit. Ooh, bad TV, old. What does it do? I'm just saying that on top of all of this, you can, of course, then even tweak stuff to make it in such a way that not sure what it does. Whew. To even give it some texture, or even where's my colors? Where's the invert? Wait. So what happens just by playing with things as inversion? Um, yeah, that's me. I kind of like try to play around with this noise. But just to give a sense of that whatever you do in front of that or before, then in the end you can tweak or stylize or give it or put it on a pre-filled texture if you need to kind of make it dark or more destructive. Any questions, or is there another problem that because of this that someone thought, oh, but hey, how do you do this? Or are the brains already saturated with information?
I have a question for the
No, you have to use the text of the score. Yeah. So in that sense, that's, I think, also part of, with typography, in the sense that either you kind of think about what are the boundaries between the content that I get and what can I do with them, because in a way that you could say that creates maybe a new type of content in the way you treat it. But in a lot of ways, whether it's also the complication of working with the restrictions of, okay, I have already the freedom to pick my own texts, but in this case you could see them as, let's say, tiny little artworks. So I also need to respect them. Doesn't mean that I cannot experiment with them, or in some cases at certain points really destroy them. But it is another step for you to kind of become an author next to someone else's work. So I at least that's my opinion, that you need to always kind of be humble and think about what is your position in this. I tend to be very kind of more surface oriented, in the sense that if I deal with someone else's text, I treat them with respect. If I want to make something myself, I will make my own text, or I do something that is at the core of generating something with self-generated text, or I copy paste, or I do something with it. But there's a fine line, but it's very hard to place your own work or your own use of typography on top of, let's say, a famous artist. There's a bit of city. Mm-hmm.
Together, but I think choosing something that you think like makes you time, then being like, am I still gonna use this in the future? I think if you already like finished your After Effects file, then you can always try to
Yeah, but I think that there is already so much to explore just by using the typography in After Effects. Then, of course, like if Cinema 4D opens up a Pandora's box of possibilities on top of that, like liquid blobs going in and out of the typeface and everything. But just the simple thing of creating animations or going from one type of content to the other over time is already, to do the timing really properly, can already kind of be kind of like a painstaking exercise of like, when does something enter, when does something leave, and then think about like, oh, if I want to use sound, what sound, when is the sound entering, how does that combine with the quickness and the speed of the animation, that it kind of really, because you know it, you know, you also see it when it, if it's not really spot on, it is really off. It is like it's deadly, because you instantly notice when things are not actually working really well. Yeah. To add markers.
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah, I don't use them much actually here, but I think that probably on the markers. Add marker. Under layer. So now I just duplicated the same one and just dragged a soup on top of it and put it back in. So then I even have the city going from two different directions. So to speak. And if I would, in this case, say that my view here, this active camera here is, let's say, slightly different, so I can, and this one then it probably updates it in here. Wow, it's getting really 90s here all of a sudden. Have you ever heard, do you guys know Underworld? The techno band? Huh? You like it? Right, you know Underworld, right? Who knows Underworld? They were pretty big, eh? Huh? I think they had their momentum, their big momentum. What was it, 2005? Huh? I know. No. And I think that You guys, do you know the film Train Spotting?
Yes.
Yeah, it's, let's say Train Spotting and Underworld is actually kind of connected, the soundtrack to it. But at the end of the 90s, there were a collective. So you had, there was a studio called Tomato, and Tomato in London had visual artists and musicians. So part of the group was Underworld, which was, let's say, by then the biggest techno act in the world. They even played in like stadiums with techno, which was not done before. And there were VJ collectives and artists and graphic designers as a studio. That was pretty new back then. But especially their video work and VJ work had this kind of raw aesthetic, but it was really good. Also, the combination of sound and music and graphic design and visuals. I saw it once live in London in 1998. Sounds really old, huh? But it was amazing. Like this warehouse, 6 floors, and then live VJing over 6 floors, filled with people, was the most amazing party I've ever been to.
And then
Yeah, because it has this kind of like mashup of things going through each other and. Ooh. Okay. Last render of the day. Let's see how much pain my processor has to go through now.
I think my supervisor said something. You don't have enough memory, work hard or whatever.
yeah, same. And I was like, am I supposed to like walk around with my hard disk like
Nice, yeah, the internal, your memory of your ROM.
Otherwise, it's like no, but like it says something like in the beginning, like show this every time or ignore. And I'm like, yeah, show
Oh.
me, 'cause if I-
One good tip while working with this program is that there is a function, it's called purge. Yeah, because your device stores a lot of this kind of renders and the processing of this to make things go faster. But it could be that also like, where did my hard disk space go? Which is then allocated to your After Effects. So if you say purge all, then it gives you this liberating message of like, oh, we cleared 25 gigabytes. It's like, oh. So think about this, that also this rendering, that it kind of, huh?
Where is bridge?
I think it's under,
It's like
yeah, purge.
oh yeah.
All memory in disk cache.
Oh.
So then it cleans your memory located to your projects that can sometimes help you out.
Is Spark also the other group project?
Like the programs. Photoshop and Illustrator, maybe. It's you can do it manually if you go to your computer. Like about this Mac, and then you go to storage, and then there's your key that you can press, and then you can go to the application storage, and then you can manually do that.
No, I think so too. Or sometimes just restart. I know it sounds weird to sometimes do it, but sometimes just restart the computer might also do a lot of good to. Huh? Yeah, and I think that because I was recording this also for you guys and for the first group, is that I think that it even goes slower because OBS is running on the background recording my graphic card, so that. Yeah, but this blend modes is like, you know, it's even just tweaking with a lot of, like a couple of little settings and just playing around gives you also kind of new ideas. And sometimes you have to also commit of just making stupid stuff to know what it does. And sometimes by making like these little failures or hiccups, you actually sometimes stumble upon like, oh, hey, interesting, never thought of this. Where can I use this? Or at least I like that. Hey, that was it, guys. While my computer is still rendering, I think that I'm gonna check it out and at least save this because I find it quite amusing, my make a soup. For next week, try as many just make free studies. Try to kind of approach it without too much kind of ambition of that it needs to be a brilliant kind of thing already. Make ideas, what kind of typography, what typefaces, what is kind of the voice that needs to be embedded. Try to pick a couple of things of trying it out and see, oh, what do I want? What kind of things am I already able to work with? What kind of, or make little notes if you think, I would maybe I would love to make something like this, but I have no clue how to do it. Maybe then next week I can also show some stuff about expressions in After Effects. So you can also like have little parts of codes that says this layer follow that layer, but with a delay of so many microseconds. So you can just move something around and then everything moves, but with a slight delay. So you get this kind of like wave form, stuff like that. Can also be interesting, but I think in the most simple sense, I think just to focus on the look and feel, what kind of transformations, what kind of animations, what kind of story do you want to tell per little clip, yeah? And don't make it too complicated for yourselves, because there are 5. Yeah? Not that there's one image or one event score will take 4 weeks of After Effects to finish.
But they should kind of follow the same rhythm or formula.
Yeah, they need to kind of be kind of a series.
They're kind of
Crazy. Families can be super different.
Ah,
Oh. Big soup. Your laptop will probably crash.
Yeah.
You're making